shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Eros, always the centre of Britain's demonstrations of delight, was where you bought your flags and patriotic label pins, relief and victory. Where the emotions of the moment, Mr. Lloyd George's reconstruction could wait. Plenty of time for that. It was certainly for our business to make Britain a land fit for heroes to live in. But first, London must be a city fit for heroes to enjoy. That was the spirit in Germany. Defeat, hunger, despair, strikes, revolution. The destroyed Kaiser's Palace in Berlin. Life began again. The derby was run at Epsom again. A false derby had been held at Newmarket during the war years. Here is Lord Glanley, leading in his horse, Grand Parade, winner of the 1919 race. Policemen had longer moustaches in those early days. Have you noticed? The biggest news story of 1919 was the scuttling of the German Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow, 8 months after its surrender. Of 74 warships in turn, 48 sank within an hour when the German sailors opened the sea cocks at the order of the Admiral von Ruyter. He said that he was obeying the Kaiser's orders given him before the war, that no German battleship should be allowed to fall into enemy hands, and denied that he had broken the armistice since he had no notice of its extension beyond June the 21st, the day of expiry. The German sailors risked their lives in carrying out their admiral's orders. At noon on the 21st, the German ensign was run up. The battleships began to settle, and their crews crowded into boats, or swam for it. Some of the British guard ships, uncertain what was going on, opened fire, and there were over 199 casualties. Here we have Mr. Winston Churchill, who is presenting Alcock £10,000 prize money for their flight.
The emancipation of the war had taught them that feminine talent could be just as useful in a public career as it was in the home. Oxford University acknowledged this on October the 14th, 1920, by conferring degrees for the first time upon 50 of their women graduates. But Cambridge held out against the feminine invasion. The first woman graduate to receive an Oxford degree was Miss Ivory Williams. The Beggar's Opera. He put on a stopgap in the hope that it would run for a month. Actually, it went on the Lyrics Theatre, Hammersmith, for nearly 2 years. Old song tunes, dialogue made this show the most popular in town. Irish troubles broke out again. A movement called Sinn Féin, meaning ourselves alone, had been organised during the war to separate Ireland from British rule. By 1920, opinion had become so bitter against the English that all through the year rebellion was breaking out in Ireland. Guerrilla warfare, organised murder, and arson was carried on in town and countryside. British troops were sent over, and this picture shows the arrest of 2 men during a raid on the Ministry of Labour offices in Dublin. Warwick Armstrong, great all-round cricketer who was criticised for his tactics as captain of the Australian team that came to England in the summer. Australia won the first 3 test matches, so winning the Ashes. The 4th match was drawn, and in the 5th Armstrong took off his best bowlers, fielded in the deep, and said the critics indifferent to the result. When he retired from the first-class cricket the following year, he had made more than 17,000 runs and taken more than 900 wickets. Carpenter was knocked out by Dempsey in the 4th round. 90,000 people paid nearly £400,000 to see the great fight at Jersey City, USA on July the 2nd between Carpenter, the Frenchman, and Jack Dempsey, the American, for the heavyweight championship of the world. It was anybody's fight up to 3 rounds. In the 4th, Carpenter was floored for a count of 9. And immediately after the knockout came, he sprained his wrist and broke his right thumb in 2 places, while Dempsey was unmarked. Carpenter had come to the end of a grand boxing career. The HOR-38 was built by the Admiralty and sold to the United States Navy. £1 million hangar had been erected for her at the Lakehurst, New Jersey. Here is the airship in Howden Aerodrome just before setting off on her last flight. At 5 o'clock on the afternoon of August 24th, after she had been out all night to complete trials, the HOR-38 sent the message, landing at Howden at 6:30 p.m. The betrothal of 24-year-old Princess Mary to Viscount Lascelles, 39-year-old millionaire's son of the Earl of Harwood, was officially announced from Buckingham Palace on Tuesday, November the 22nd, 1921. Her engagement ring was a single emerald ring, square cut. On the last day of the following February, the marriage was held at Westminster Abbey, and the bridal bouquet was left by the Royal Viscountess on the cenotaph in Whitehall. The abbey was thrown open to the public after the ceremony, and a mile-long queue was formed by people waiting to go inside. And next year they were married. Crowds stood outside Buckingham Palace and cheered on the wedding day of King George V, only daughter to Lord Lascelles. The royal party came out on the balcony, which has figured in so many pictures in the last few years. From the right, Queen Mary, Queen Alexandra, Queen Mother, widow of King George VII, who was now in her 79th year, Lord Lascelles, Princess Mary, and King George V. Ivy Wood was a little girl of 13 who lived in Cheshire. She was strangled by a night watchman, Arthur Beard, who was afterwards sent to a criminal lunatic asylum. The case was one of the big crimes of 1919 and was remarkable as the first in which a murder appeal came before the House of Lords. Billy Carlton was a young actress who died from an overdose of cocaine, which she took after the Victory Ball at the Albert Hall. This was the start of the great drug traffic roundup which went on for some years. This soldier typifies the Ireland of 1922, a land of guerrillas, warfare with brother fighting against brother, father against son. Dublin was a city of smoke and fire. From all parts of the country came tales of battles, ambushes, kidnappings and murders. This disturbance spread over the border into Ulster, and for several weeks there was rioting in Belfast. Then in August, Arthur Griffiths fell dead from heart failure. Lawrence of Arabia became aircraftsman Shaw. T.E. Lawrence, the shy military genius who had practically single-handed aroused and organised the Arabs against the Turks, was called the uncrowned King of Arabia. In October, to escape publicity, he became a mechanic in the Royal Air Force under the name of Air Craftsman Shaw. 1922 broadcasting began from the famous London station at the top of Marconi House, Strand, in November 1922. The British Broadcasting Company had been formed to send out short, regular, sponsored programmes to the 8,000 people who had paid 15 shillings each for a conductor's licence. Listeners were often kept waiting while the piano was shifted. Men in the studio were sometimes heard saying things that should never have been broadcast. But no listeners bothered much about these things. It was a miracle that anything was heard at all. One of the first announcers was Arthur Burroughs, who was in charge of the programme arrangements and later became known to thousands of listeners to the Children's Hour as Uncle Arthur. One of the first commentators was Jack Dempsey, heavyweight champion of the world, who described the Carpenter-Lewis fight in May 1922. His round-by-round story from the ringside at Olympia was telephoned to the Daily Express broadcasting station at Slough, headquarters of the Radio Communications Company, and then sent out to the world. Famous crimes of 1922. Remember the Thompson Bywaters case? Shortly after midnight on October the 4th, Thompson was walking home from Ilford Station with his wife, Edith. Edith was stabbed several times in the back of the neck. Bywaters was the murderer, a 20-year-old youth who had been a lodger at the Thompsons' home until the husband had found him making love to his wife and turned him out. Mrs. Thompson wrote passionate love letters to Bywaters, told him that she was trying to murder her husband with poison and ground glass. Of course, this was untrue, but Bywaters kept the letters, and they were brought up at the trial. Both Mrs. Thompson and Bywaters were convicted. They were found guilty of wilful murder and sentenced to death. There was a great public controversy. Was Bywaters just a dope? Did Mrs. Thompson say she was murdering her husband? just to prevent Bywater's doing so? Would their appeal succeed? Public opinion received a shock. Together with her lover, Mrs. Thompson was hanged on January the 9th, 1923. 1922. The women, they were trying to look younger, with makeup, lipstick, rouge and short hair. The short hair style adopted by women on war work had become a fashion. Here is the bobbed hair style of the year. Every day, in every way, I am getting better and better. This was the phase of the great bearded French physician who founded a system of treating patients by auto-suggestion and came to London in 1922 to give demonstrations. His cult became a craze. He would say to his audience, "Clasp your hands, clasp hard, harder. Now say, I want to lose them, but I can't." The claspers would strain to loosen their hands. "Think now, I can." Mr. Coombe would say they did, and the hands would unclasp. For his last demonstration before he left England, he visited a hospital for shell-shock cases. His audience became hysterical, and Coombe had to leave. He treated the matter lightly, but one of the doctors said it put the work of the hospital back years. The painting of the Blue Boy was visited by 100,000 people early in 1922 when it hung in the National Gallery before being sent to Henry Huntington, the American who had paid £170,000 for it. Gainsborough's famous picture formerly belonged to the Duke of Westminster, had been cleaned, and these visitors saw it for the first time without its former coat of yellow varnish. Critics said the painting was now too blue, but the actual paint of the picture had not been worked on or touched at all during the cleaning. The sale of the Blue Boy made people art conscious of 1922. "We ought to find some way," they wrote to the newspapers, "to prevent our great paintings being sent abroad." In 1923, a Mr. Baldwin became Premier. This country did not know him as they do now. For 8 years he had been a quiet but popular parliamentary backbencher, until in 1917, at the age of 50, he became Finance Secretary to the Treasurer at the Carlton Club in 1922. He moved that the Conservatives fight the general election as an independent party with their own programme and their own leader. The party came into power. Stanley Baldwin was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and in May 1923, with the resignation of Bonar Law, he stepped up into place as Premier. Even then he had a favourite pipe. And in Munich, ex-Corporal Hitler, former house painter, was sent to jail in 1921. He had begun to appear in Munich beer gardens, preaching from the tabletops against the German government, the Versailles Treaty, capitalists and Jews. He said to journalists, if Germany could be given a Mussolini, the people would kneel down and worship him. 2 years later, with General Ludendorff as his patron, he was leader of a National Socialist Party, which, on November the 9th, marched into Munich as first stage in a march on Berlin. The insurrection collapsed under fire from Bavarian police. Ludendorff, in black coat and top hat, marched on, and bullets missed him. Hitler vanished, was captured 2 days later and charged with high treason. Here he is, the man in the raincoat, standing next to Ludendorff just before the trial. Again, the balcony. After the wedding, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, looked up to the familiar balcony and cheered when Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, the Duchess of York, soon to be known as the Smiling Duchess. 1923, another royal wedding that year, was on November 12th between Princess Maud, daughter of the Princess Royal, Duchess of Fife, to Lord Carnegie, son of the Earl of Southesk. This informal snapshot shows King George V, Queen Mary, and the royal brothers after the ceremony. In December, the centre piers of Waterloo Bridge subsided, almost 8 inches in one spot, and a definite curve could be seen in the roadway. The London County Council called in bridge experts to inspect it. Waterloo Bridge, designed by John Rennie and opened in 1817, was regarded as the finest in London. One of the most beautiful in Europe, and a great deal of controversy followed the suggestion that a new bridge should be built. The Battle of Waterloo Bridge rally began the following year when increasing cracks convinced engineers that a new bridge was needed. The year of the Cup Final stampede in 1923. Were you one of those who tried vainly to get in at Wembley? 300,000 people hoped to see the first Wembley Cup final match between Bolton Wanderers and West Ham United. 200,000 of them entered the stadium, which was designed to hold 125,000 only. Barriers were stormed, mobs climbed fences, the playing field was invaded, and the game held up for 3/4 of an hour. Ambulance men attended to 1,000 casualties. Nobody would accept responsibility for the disorder. But the hero of the whole show was a police inspector on a snow-white prancing horse, who started from the middle of the ground, slowly edged back the crowds and cleared a space. At the game, Bolton Wanderers beat West Ham United by 2-0. Calling very few cars. A firm of radio dealers in the East End of London found a new advertising stunt in 1923. They fitted a 3-wheel roundabout with a radio and sent it touring the streets, relaying concerts to the public. This Listen While You Drive effort anticipated car radio by more than 5 years. We can see the first Labour government. At the end of 1923, Mr. Baldwin's government fell. Stanley Baldwin went to the country on a programme of protection and imperial preference, but without food taxes. He was defeated, and the next January, Ramsay MacDonald leader of the Socialists, took office. For the first time in history, Britain had a Labour government. The country wondered how the new ministers would act. Would they fly in the face of time-honoured formalities? Tom Griffiths, Socialist treasurer of the household, who had been a Welsh tinplate worker, told afterwards how King George V met his Labour ministers. None of us felt in the least embarrassed with such a kindly host. We all made friends at once, and he gave us lucid instructions about our duties, not without a touch of humour. Above are the Socialists Ramsay MacDonald, J. H. Thomas, Arthur Henderson, and J. R. Kleins, after leaving the palace. The novelty of Mr. Thomas dressed up had no sooner worn off than Labour was out again. They had been in office only 9 months. Like the previous government, they had done little to reduce the high unemployment figures. MacDonald, however, had initiated a revision of German reputations that was to lead to partial relief of Europe's financial troubles. Now, Mr. Justice Darling, he was a character. During his 26 years on the bench, Mr. Justice Darling, who retired in 1923, was given a peerage on New Year's Day, 1924, became the most widely known of England's criminal judges. This short, slight man, with the sharp-featured face and keen intellectual, came to be looked on as a character. He would be cold, austere, then suddenly playful and almost waggish. Very few of his cases were ever reported without the bracketed phrase, "laughter in court." There were among his witticisms to a witness who said he went to the Elephant Inn to telephone a trunk call, I presume. To a woman witness, "You have repeated the same thing so often that you make me think I am back in the House of Commons." To a long-winded barrister who complained that the echoing court brought all his words back to him, "You have my sympathy." "How long have you been a widower?" he asked the doubtful witness, who had said he had been wedded to the truth from infancy. Lord Darling published a book of enigms. Some of them are the chief difference between prisoners and other people is perhaps captivity. If a man stays away from his wife for 7 years, the law presumes that the separation to have killed him. Yet, according to our daily experience, it might well prolong his life. 1924. That year there were floods in South and East England owing to heavy winter rains. Tradesmen and postmen called at low-lying bungalows and houses in waders, boats and punts. The Thames at Teddington could take at the most 4.5 million gallons a day without flooding. The daily flow in January was sometimes 1 million gallons, more than this. By 1925, Mr. Baldwin's pipe was so famous that any facts about it made news. He confessed in January that he never paid more than 3 shillings for a pipe, revealed in June that he smoked an ounce of tobacco a day. When given the freedom of his native town, Rudley, Warwickshire, in August, he was also given the pipes shown here. He now had 7,000. Eros came down. Early in 1925, where it shows pushing the face of one of the workmen working on the reconstruction of Piccadilly Tube Station, which was to be built in overall form under the circus. It was 6 years before Eros came back. Jacobs beat records set by W. G. Grace. Playing against Somerset at Taunton on August 17, 1925, Jack Hobbs, after making 99 runs, raised his bat, hit the ball, and ran for a single. The man at the scoreboard calmly put up the 100, and then the game stopped for 5 minutes, while 10,000 onlookers jumped, grasped, cheered, clapped, and waved their hats in the air. This 42-year-old Surrey batsman had equalled W. G. Grace's record of 126 centuries in first-class cricket. To his wife he sent the telegram, "Got it, at last," and the following day he made another century and broke the record. Train number 1, 100 years after. With black fumes belching from its tall smokestack, George Stephenson's 400-pound engine, which opened the world's first passenger railway between Stockton and Darlington in 1825, made the 14-mile journey again in July. To mark the railway's centenary, making a good 6 miles an hour, it led a procession of locomotives and rolling stock to show 100 years of railway progress. Britain now had 20,314 miles of track, trains weighing 1,500 tons, and engines costing £8,000 to build. That hat is worn by those who have the degree of Doctor of Law at Johannesburg University. It was given to the Prince in June. A university student passed as the royal visitor, inspected the guard of honour, acknowledged the crowd's cheers, listened attentively to the address of welcome, and entered the university. Then the real prince arrived, and the programme had to begin again. Queen Alexandra died in November 1925 and was buried at Sandringham during a snowstorm. As a fair Danish princess, she had come to England more than 60 years before as the bride of Edward VII. Then Prince of Wales, Queen Mother for 15 years before her death, she had become popularly known as the Queen of the Roses. For roses were sold to help the hospitals on June the 26th each year. Alexandra Day, the day that had been chosen in 1912 to commemorate her landing in England. In a special birthday message to the Daily Express in December 1924, she said, "How wonderful England is. Tell the people of Britain how grateful I am to them for thinking of me on my 80th birthday." Skirts were at their shortest. They had reached the knee by the end of 1926. In speeches and newspaper articles, people denounced the immodesty of the new fashion. Do grown-up, married women wear their dress above the knee? Asked Judge Sir Alfred Tobin in January. Yes, if they are slim, said a woman witness. Do you mean to say one's grandmother would wear a short skirt? Cried the judge. What ridiculous nonsense, dressmakers complain. 2 because only 3 yards of material were needed where formerly 7 had been used. That was the year of the Charleston. The hectic, high-stepping, rhythmic exercise that was promptly banned in many ballrooms to prevent accidents. On crowded dance floors, the sidekick steps of the Charleston meant torn stockings and barked skins. Doctors, too, condemned this side-kicking. They said it strained ligaments in the legs. The Charleston was described by an expert exponent as an exaggeratedly syncopated wriggle impossible to interpretate merely with the feet. In the autumn, a new and easier Charleston was introduced. The kicks had been abolished. The feet were now scarcely lifted from the floor. By the end of 1926, the tango was also coming into favour. Princess Elizabeth was born on the 21st of April, 1926. She was christened Elizabeth Alexandra Mary at Buckingham Palace the following month. Her Royal Highness and the infant princess are making very satisfactory progress, said the official bulletin. The phrase infant princess was a reminder of Queen Victoria's advice to the official, who had referred to the birth of a royal baby. Royal ladies, he was told, do not have babies, they have princes or princesses. First child to be born to the then Duke and Duchess of York, Princess Elizabeth, was now after the Prince of Wales and their father heir to the throne. This group, taken at the christening, includes from left to right the Duke Connaught, Queen Mary, King George V, Duchess of York, with Princess Elizabeth, Duke of York, Countess of Strathmore, Earl of Strathmore, and Princess Mary. She hasn't changed much, has she? She had blue eyes and weighed a little under average. All through her christening she cried lustily, but at 6 months she was a smiling, good-tempered child. She was said to take after her father in appearance, but had her mother's disposition. When greyhound racing started, fewer than 2,000 spectators, more than half having been admitted free, watched Misley win the first public greyhound race, to be held in England at Manchester Bellevue on July the 24th, 1926. This was the start of the sport that now draws 22 million people each year to more than 100 tracks all over Britain. A.J. Cook led the miners, and the miners led the strike. Coal miners had come under government control towards the end of the war. In 1920, a 12-day strike by the miners brought temporary wages increases. The following year, mines once again came under private ownership, and miners were told that the national rates of pay would stop, and the pre-war system of paying according to districts would begin. They came out on strike for 3 months, but receiving no support from the government. Went back to work under district rates of pay. As trade conditions became worse, coal owners began to demand reduced wages and longer hours for miners. Arthur J. Cook, the miners' leader, eloquent speechmaker with a liking for slogans, "Give miners the cry," "Not a minute on the day," "Not a penny off the pay." With the miners' strike, volunteer drivers were given escorts. When this was done to a bus which had been set on fire by strikers in South London, police protection was given to drivers. Barbed wire was fixed over the bus bonnets. The official paper under Winston Churchill was published daily from May the 5th until May the 12th. The British Gazette, of only 2 pages, was the national news sheet. The Daily Express managed to appear every day as a single sheet, printed and published by volunteer staff. A face of the year. A Miss Jessie Matthews, dark-eyed, slightly built, one of a family of 11 children who had been brought up in Soho, arrived frightened but determined for an audition before theatre producer Andre Charlotte. 100 other girls were queued up, though only 24 were needed. "What do you mean by keeping me waiting?" demanded Jessie, as Charlotte came near. "I want my lunch." Amused Andrea, Charlotte turned to her and said, "Step out. You're engaged." Standing on an empty stage, she sang a simple little song into the microphone, and a minute later the wax record of her voice was played back to the critics. They liked it. Jessie Matthews was at the beginning of her new stage career. First seen at Wimbledon in 1927. Betty Nuttall, 16 years of age, winner of the Junior Singles Championship 1924-26, played on the centre court at Wimbledon against the German tennis champion, pretty 18-year-old Silla Ossam, and won the match. The following day she startled the lawn tennis world by beating Mrs. Melleroy, 8 times woman champion of the United States. "I just don't know how I did it," said Betty after the match. "It was the greatest surprise of my life. I did not expect to win. In those days she used to put her tongue in her cheek whenever she did anything peculiar, good or bad." Major Seagrave did 203 miles per hour. Hurtling over Daytona Beach, Florida, in his 1000 HP car, the Secretess, Major H.O.D. Seagrave, in white suit and helmet, broke Captain Malcolm Campbell's previous world record of 174.22 miles per hour by reaching an average speed of 203.79 miles per hour. Before the attempt, the Secretess was started up by a compressed air and driven to the start of the 9-mile course. When the signal came, "all clear," Seagrave started off in his first gear at 73 miles per hour, reached 132 miles per hour in second gear, and then went into top. Faster and faster went the car, becoming more and more difficult to hold in a straight line. 10,000 spectators held their breath as a gust of wind sent the great car skidding towards the sea, ploughing through markings, flags, then swerving back again as Seagrave gained control. After the record had been broken, he was carried shoulder high back to his hotel. His wrist ached. He had burns caused by the wind. He said, "I think we have put the world speed record where it will stay for some considerable time to come." The following year, though Malcolm Campbell at Dayton travelled at 206.96 miles per hour, Kaiser's sister marries ex-dishwasher. Touched by the stories of the 27-year Alexander Zervov, poverty-stricken Russian refugee who had been dishwasher, sailor, and circus performer, the ex-Kaiser's sister, 61-year-old Princess Victoria of Schurenburg-Lippe, married him in November 1927. American face that belonged to Charles Lindbergh, 6-foot young man who flew out into the dark Newfoundland fog on May the 20th to fly 3,500 miles across the Atlantic in an attempt to win £5,000 prize, which was offered for the first New York-Paris flight. Americans who had known of him as the lucky fool because of previous air feats in that country said, "That's the last of him. He has tried too much." Only once before had the Atlantic been crossed in a non-stop flight, in 1919 when Alcock and Brown flew from Newfoundland to Ireland. But on Saturday, May the 21st, tape machines clicked out the message: Captain Lindbergh arrived at Librot Aerodrome at 10:15 p.m. King George V approved the designs by George Kruger Gray for a new set of silver coins on November the 3rd, 1927. For the first time since 1902, a new crown was to be issued from the Royal Mint. Once again the rose, thistle and shamrock appeared in the coinage. They had been absent since Queen Victoria's reign. The first automatic phone. When an engineer knocked out a wedge between two cables at midnight on November the 12th, Holborn, first London Automatic Telephone Exchange, switched over from the old to the new method of working. For some weeks after, people said that the automatic phones did not get numbers at a fraction of the speed of the number. "Please, girls," but the post office answered that this was due to congestion on the lines, and the following year announced they were going to spend £25 million to extend the automatic system. Here are some automatic meters in an exchange. Each subscriber has a meter on which his calls are registered. They are operated as soon as a call is answered and kept working till the call ends. For subscribers with poor eyesight, the post office issued a special dial phones marked with large figures. The new Ford was revealed to the public in December, and for the first time the Ford car was not the cheapest on the British market. The new two-seater sold at £145. Morris was making a two-seater for £142, 10 pence. For 5 years, at a cost of £20 million, Henry Ford had been planning a new model because the car which made him famous, the Ford Tin Lizzie, did not appeal to women buyers. They disliked driving in a car which had been the subject of so many jokes. However, jokes or no jokes, sales of the old Ford model passed the 15 million mark that year. Leon Feuchtwanger, a German Jew, was author of the most discussed novel of 1927. Jew sus novelist Arnold Bennett had made it popular in England. It is already a matter of history, said Feuchtwanger during a visit to London in the November, that it was Arnold Bennett in the Evening Standard who first made the book widely known. In America, Jew sus appeared under the title Power. We like the one-word titles, said the publisher. We shall call his next book Success. Feuchtwanger's next book, published in 1927, was The Ugly Duchess. The first woman flyer across the Atlantic, Miss Amelia Earhart. I am the proudest woman in the whole world, said America's Miss Linda, 29-year-old Amelia Earhart, when, with Wilmer Schultz, pilot, and Slim Gordon, mechanic, she landed at South Wales on June 18 after a 1,900 miles non-stop flight from Newfoundland in the triple-engine seaplane Friendship. First woman to cross the Atlantic, she said to reporters, I would sooner fly the Atlantic 10 times than face all this publicity and fuss again. Then she went off to London to buy some new clothes. Lord Haig, commander of the British forces in France during the war, died in London in January at the age of 66. His funeral procession, more than a mile long, went to Westminster Abbey, then to Waterloo Station, where the coffin was entrained for Scotland, for the burial at Beavernside, the late Earl's own. Pallbearers included Marshal Foch and 7 British Field Marshals, and then Prince of Wales, Duke of York, and Prince Henry followed the cortege. Helen Terry, one of the world's greatest actresses, chiefly famous for her Shakespearean roles in which she had played with Sir Henry Irving, died at Small Hythe, Kent, in July. On the day of her funeral, the country roads for miles around were packed with cars, and along the 100 yards of road between her house and the church stood men in summer flannels and coloured ties, women in grey summery dresses, for Ellen Terry had said, No funeral gloom, my dears, when I am gone. Mrs. Pankhurst, Ed, suffragette, leader of the women's suffrage movement, who had been imprisoned more than half a dozen times for her activities, including inciting to a riot, window breaking, assault, and complicity in a bomb outrage on Lloyd George's house, died at the age of 68 in June 1928. In the spiral, which has steel doors and is considered to be impregnable, police officers can look out on demonstrations without being seen, and are able to call up police reserves immediately in case of threatened riots in the square. In December, King George V was seriously ill with lung trouble. A month before, on a rainy, chilly day, he had attended the Cenotaph Armistice Day service, and a few days later had gone to bed suffering from a cold, with slight fever. Old Kate, who had often sold him a race card at Epsom on Derby Day, was among those who came to Buckingham Palace to hear news of his illness. Well, again, on January the 23rd, 1929, appeared the most satisfactory bulletin of the whole illness of King George V. It said was to be moved to the sea the next month, lying in an ambulance car with blinds drawn up so that he could be seen by people lining the route. He was taken for convalescence to Bungner, and in July, well again, he drove through London with the Queen in an open carriage. Tate Gallery. Pictures spoilt. 15,000 of Turner's watercolour paintings and sketches were included in the pictures worth more than £1,500,000, spoilt by floodwater pouring into the cellars of the Tate Gallery in Millbank, Westminster. Houses of Parliament, Lambeth Palace, Tower of London, Woolwich Arsenal were all flooded in January 1928. Boats were carried by the flood, water over river walls, roadways were torn up, and at Westminster, where sandbags were hurriedly piled up to cover breaches in the embankment, more than 500 telephone lines were put out of order. 1,000 extra police were brought on duty to keep people away from this dangerous area. These two were Labour. In those days, Sir Oswald Mosley, who entered Parliament as a Conservative, became an Independent, then went over to Labour, and in 1929 held cabinet rank as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, followed his leader, Mussolini, in exchanging socialism for fascism. MacDonald, then head of the Labour Party, had yet to become head of a national government of socialists. Liberals and Conservatives in October 1928, they both went to Berlin to speak at a Congress on international discussions. Talkies began. The Jazz Singer was the first feature-length talking film, though its sound was mostly all synchronized music. Blackface comedian Al Jolson sang 6 songs and also spoke a few lines. Just before recording a number, he had said on the spur of the moment, "Come on, Ma, listen to this." American audiences stood up and cheered at the spoken dialogue. This, they said, was the death of the silent movies. In England, critics said it was a freak that the silent film would always be the real cinema. Jolson's next film, however, was a riot. The Singing Fool set up new attendance records all over the country in 1929 and got everybody whistling, humming or singing its song hit, Sonny Boy. British troops leave Germany. The last of 5,000 troops who have been occupying the Rhineland since the war moved out of Wiesbaden in December 1929 to the music of Auld Lang Syne. Thousands of Germans looked on and cheered. From the masthead by the entrance to the general headquarters, a tattered weathered, stained Union Jack that had been there ever since the first soldier marched into the Rhine area was hauled down and taken away. Britain's long watch on the Rhine had ended.